let's start this day. I'm here today with my amazing colleague Chanil, who will just propose an initial activity. And then we'll hear from some amazing people.
Thank you, Laura. Good morning, Sani Bonani, Dumelang, Molweni. Bon dia. Bom dia. Welcome to the second day of ESIC. Yesterday we were very excited about all the passionate inputs and engagements and networking. It was a long day, so I hope you all rested well. I feel very energized today after having a good night's sleep compared to the night before. And we're all ready for day 2. What we're going to start off with is for you to, in 1 minute, share something positive with the person next to you. And when you're done, and we'll have a bell, you will then swap. And your neighbor will then share something positive in their life, or whatever has come up, whether it's in the last hours or in the last days. Okay, so we're going to start now with that before we get into our lightning talks. So, starting now, right? You have 1 minute. You'll find somebody. Okay. Sorry, the first round you had a little longer because I was trying to set up the timer, but I hope you've had time to share. I didn't give you any instructions like when the person is sharing or speaking that you listen. I use it as an exercise, as an exercise in class to get people to learn how to listen. Right, and it could be for longer. Great, I'm not going to take a round of checking in with you on what has come up from your sharing, but we're going to get into the next session, which is going to be the lightning talks, and my colleague Laura will introduce the speakers and give you an overview of the session.
That's great. So, this session is no pressure, called the inspirational session. And the reason we wanted to have this space is that many colleagues, as you know, are joining the ESIC journey at this moment that we are arriving at a landing point. And they have different perspectives that are so interesting, so complementary to all we've heard so far. And we wanted to give them space to talk about their experience and how it relates to the process that we developed during these 6 months and the vision that we want as a community to carry far, far long after. So the idea is that these people help us to frame the discussion for how interest holders, as you know, today is a day dedicated to interest holders. All our concurrent sessions will also keep this conversation going, and how these values, roles, and insights across all levels of evidence-informed decision-making are recognized and addressed. So we are having today very quick, and it's sad, but then the conversation can keep going during the coffee breaks, insights from some colleagues that represent a diversity of voices, and we are really, really happy and honored to hear from them. The first person who's sharing their perspective with us is Fernando Botelho. He sent a video for us, so he will be talking a little bit about assistive technologies and taking a disability lens to ESIC solutions. Please, Fernando.
Hello, my name is Fernando Botelho, and I'm Program Specialist for Assistive Technology in the Children with Disabilities team at UNICEF headquarters in New York. Thank you for the opportunity to share a few thoughts on including persons with disabilities in the wonderful work you're doing to improve access and usability of evidence. I'll divide my comments in three areas. First, persons with disabilities, and then the ecosystem that already exists, and then the process that I think is most effective at enabling inclusion. Persons with disabilities are about 1.3 billion of today's world population. We are talking about 1 in every 6 persons having one or another type of disability. All of us who have a disability, I am blind myself, we need to use assistive technology to perform day-to-day tasks. So that might include something like a wheelchair, might include a hearing aid, a screen reading software, and so forth. Now, assistive technology is only as effective as the environment in which it's placed. So a wheelchair in a location that has a lot of obstacles like steps and there are no ramps will be much less effective. So it's key to consider universal design principles when producing any kind of environment, whether it's physical or digital. I would like to talk a little bit about the existing environments, the ecosystem of legal commitments, of legal instruments, of technical tools that have already been developed so that anyone wanting to make a process, an initiative more inclusive doesn't have to invent a lot of things from scratch. Legal instruments and commitments include the UN Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, includes others such as the Marrakesh Treaty, which allows documents, allows books to be offered in alternative formats without a concern that it will be breaking copyrights. There are also technical tools such as the DAISY format, the WCAG, the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, developed by the Worldwide Consortium. Now, in principle, you want to always adopt standards that are open, not just for file formats, but also for communication protocols when possible, and design interfaces that follows guidelines such as the WCAG. The DAISY format will assist you with producing documents, but there are many tools as well that will generally make processes more inclusive because it allows flexibility for those consuming information to choose what format they prefer. That's always the best option. Yes, offer DAISY, but give people a chance to choose other formats as well. For those of you that are technical, that usually means having JSON or other ways of presenting information, APIs, so that the end user can take that information and build something like Markdown or PDF, archival quality PDFs that are accessible as well, PDFA, and so forth. Ideally, you would want to use also wonderful technologies that have already been put together like Desmos or VoxLens or accessible document model so that you're not starting from scratch. Ultimately, the ideal situation is not to always be producing 300-page documents, but have interactive ways of accessing the information that is needed. Now, moving on to the process. The process of any initiative should involve organizations of persons with disabilities because that's the most effective and efficient way of taking into account the needs and the contributions of persons with disabilities. You want to have materials available in local languages, and that should include, whenever possible, sign languages for each country, but at least captioning if the sign language is not possible. Ideally, people should receive training on the scientific method because accessibility is not just about the physical access or the digital access to information, but also the understanding of it and the ability to express yourself in a way that is constructive and helpful. Whenever using AI, which is so powerful, it's key that it be used to augment human capabilities and productivity rather than replacing it, because AI still has many issues with hallucination and accuracy. So you want to always have humans as part of the process for validation. At the end of the day, when we're talking about inclusion, the essential element in all of this is to make sure that people with disabilities through OPDs or any other effective method are part of the process from inception. You want them to be involved in design, in deployment, and in maintenance of your initiative so that they are not an afterthought, so that the processes are effective and affordable, so that everything is sustainable over time and scalable. The essence of this process is really to make sure that there is a conversation going on. Persons with disabilities are not just the consumer of information, but we are contributors to the process, just like any other segment of the population. Thank you.
Thank you, Fernando. So I think the message that Fernando sends to us is a very important message. My colleague Danilo, raise your hand, Danilo, here. He is the journalist for the organization I work for, and he's been also sharing this message from his lived experience. And it takes money, it takes time, it takes desire, but this is something that if we want a collective vision, can't be overstated. So let's commit to Fernando in his call to action. Chanil?
Great. Thanks, Laura. Next, we have Paulina Tefu. Paulina, we welcome you to share your insights on evidence synthesis and the tech industry. Paulina is from the tech industry. Thanks.
Thank you so much. Good morning, everybody. True South African style. Sanibonani. Okay, we're gonna try and do that again. I've only got 5 minutes, but I won't move from this because I just need to feel the energy and the vibe because we are here doing good and I'm super excited to be here. Sanibonani. Thank you so much. As Chanil has already said, my name is Paulina Tefu, and I am from a company called Digital Solution Foundry. I am the CEO at Digital Solution Foundry. I've been in the tech space for more than 18 years. It's been an exciting space, and I'm truly honored to be extending it to, obviously, evidence and the work that is being done here. We have been building software in the EIDM space for the past 8 years, even though many of you here don't know who we are. But I hope that after today, you will know that there are tech companies that care about good. One of our core values in Digital Solutions Foundry is to build technology for good. And since our inception, that has been what we have tried to be doing. I've got examples here of some of the tech that we've built in this space, working with many different partners. One of the ones that actually put us on the map, so to speak, is this one over here, the EpiMapper. We've built this over many years ago. It's been evolving, it's scalable. I believe that most of you have come across this tool in your work. So shout out to Digital Solution Foundry. We've built the solution and we know and are proud that it is making a difference. Over and above this tool, we have worked with PACE and other role players in this space to build the RIP platform. We like to call it, to simplify it for ourselves, the LinkedIn of evidence synthesis. And we've also built a dashboard for the gender-based violence. I know that the government of South Africa is looking to adopt this tool and in making it available so that it can be, it can be accessible to many other individuals. I won't go into the details of each of the tools, but what I was trying to do here is to demonstrate that we are here as partners, technology partners. We are not the core experts of this space, but we want to participate so that we can be able to build the technologies that are so much needed in order to ensure that we bridge the digital divide, we create accessibility and so forth. And so this was just a demonstration of the work that's been done over the past 8 years. And though I am a little bit worried because time and again, whenever I attend, and I have been on this journey for a very long time, I am probably one of 2 or 3 tech companies that are present. And for me, that poses a big challenge because in order to do anything effectively, you have to be able to immerse yourself in it. You have to understand the challenges. I've been in many conversations with the people around this room, and from a tech perspective, it's easier for me to be creative when I understand what the challenges are, when I understand how to ask questions, how to position. So my first call to action for today is we need more tech companies to come on this journey so that they have a better understanding of how to solution for the real needs that we are trying to resolve here. So with that said, obviously, they're not like me, so they won't come because it is difficult. And one of the big challenges that we face is funding. I mean, in every conversation, for every project that I've done, that I've shown in the previous slide, we've had to hear that, look, we don't have enough funding. This only has to go up to here. It minimizes and limits our creative abilities to produce solutions that are amazing for this space, which we all know technology is here. AI is going to take over eventually after 100 million years. Not now, it still needs the mind, the wonderful minds and the intelligence of everybody that is in here. However, in the meantime, we need to build continuously technology and solutions that enable us to be able to share information across the world. And unfortunately, some of my colleagues are not able to attend because it is not sustainable. Funding is always a problem. We have to enter into negotiations every time. We have to often wait with uncertainty. We build teams and they need to know and understand the EIDM space. They need to be part of this journey. But then there's just so much uncertainty because of the limitations of funding. So my call to action number 2 today is that we need to provide the necessary resources so that we can invest in building technology that is sustainable for the EIDM space, because that is the only way that we bridge the gaps without the traveling arrangements. I mean, we all came from everywhere, and I know for a fact that arranging travel and all of that is a mission. So we need to build sustainable solutions that enable us to talk on every single day without limiting us. And so with that, funding is key. And it is important to enable us in the technology space to be able to build long-term capacity. We are capable, we've done it. It was problematic to be able to do it and sustain it, but we are here, we did it. We just need a long-term commitment to be able to then, build teams that are sustainable, that can be comfortable in making sure that, we create a sustainable and long-term future of EIDM software engineers that understand the true intricacies of what this industry is about. So with that said, thank you so much. I know I sounded like I'm complaining, but if you take two things away. We need a commitment on resourcing so that we can build the IT teams that will look like the IT teams that support banking and financial services and sustain us long into the future. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Paulina, for the call to action and challenging the different players in this space, and for the importance of a sustainable partnership with the tech industry for solutions that's going to be accessible and is going to be affordable. So great, thank you. And we will take the points into the engagements and into the roadmap. Thank you. Next we have Sia. He's an advocate of human rights and social impact and works in this space. He will tell us more about the work he does. So thanks and welcome to the ESIC consensus session. Yeah.
Thank you very much. I've made just a few points I want to mention because once I start talking, I don't stop and I will have to be dragged off the stage. Buenos dias. Mi nombre es Siabulela Gentile. Bonjour. Je m'appelle Siabulela Gentile. Good morning. My name is Siabulela Gentile. I am a Johannesburg-based human rights defender and social impact consultant. I currently lead an NGO called Not In My Name here in South Africa, and we are primarily responsible for sustaining the hashtag Not In My Name campaign against femicide and gender-based violence. Over time, we have, however, expanded our scope to include social relief of the distressed, as well as education and skills development, to try and align more with, closely with some of the UN SDG goals, such as 2, 4, and as 5 and 6. In addition, I serve as the director of Missing X Institute, which focuses on strengthening civil and political participation and or engagement rather through community participation programs and advocacy. My advocacy journey spans almost a decade now. I transitioned from a career in civil engineering. Yes, I know, it's bizarre. I transitioned from a career in civil engineering consulting, primarily because I refused to stand by the sidelines and watch the country's moral degeneration as a mere spectator. And I believe in actively engaging communities and engagement as key tool to foster positive change. So throughout this time, I've had an opportunity to collaborate with various organizations, both in and outside of South Africa, organizations that are working in international human rights and social justice, gender equality, as well as civil and political rights. And some of my notable experiences include being an advisory council member of Together First Global Campaign in London, as well as being with the Obama Foundation Leaders Program and participating in the Mandela Washington Fellowship for our Young African Leaders Initiatives, and recently being invited to be part of the Marianne Initiative Laureates in Paris for human rights defenders, where I spent some months training on leadership, advocacy, as well as negotiation. And so these experiences have reinforced the importance of evidence-based advocacy in the work that I do, using data and facts and research to craft effective strategies. A large part of my work is spent working with communities facing underdevelopment in South Africa, high crime, unemployment, and substance abuse, to name but a few. Understanding the context then, the nature of the problems is very critical in the work that we do. And so as advocacy development practitioners or as advocacy strategists, we always ask ourselves, what is the core problem? What is not working? What are the opportunities that exist for change? Who can make the change? and at what level, and what are the power dynamics involved, and lastly, who can support us? Answering these questions relies heavily on evidence. Evidence leads or lends us credibility as advocates. It guides our decision-making process, but it also assists us to influence public opinion. Without evidence, our advocacy efforts risk losing legitimacy and effectiveness. Using evidence for advocacy not only strengthens the quality of decision-making, but also demands a greater participation from everyday people, which I am one of them. Their voices, informed by their lived experiences and credible data and knowledge, must be central to shaping policies that affect their lives. There needs to be a shift, and that is the submission that I'm making, in who sets the agenda. The efforts must be from the ground going up, and not the other way around, from the top to the bottom. We need to partner with us more. You need to capacitate us and work with us to magnify the citizens' voices. In a time of shrinking civic space, consensus building must go beyond closed-door negotiations among the elites and technocrats. Ordinary citizens can no longer afford to remain passive spectators in processes that affect their lives but exclude their voices. Using evidence for advocacy empowers citizens to participate meaningfully, not only by voicing concerns, but by contributing knowledge, data, and lived experiences. Transforming evidence synthesis should also mean resisting exclusion and reimagining participation as a shared responsibility in creating and shaping just and inclusive society. As I leave the stage, in conclusion, I wish to remind you that there are only two ways in which you can influence human behavior. One is inspiration. Second is manipulation. And manipulation is wrong. It is criminal. And we have seen it and we have witnessed the destructive outcomes of manipulation, misinformation, and disinformation, such as the recent claims of false white genocide in South Africa, which sowed division and fear. In contrast, lastly, inspiration is a beautiful force because it moves us forward, it unites us, and it empowers us to create positive, sustainable, and long-lasting change. So I ask you this morning, will you manipulate us by excluding us and continuing to set the agenda from the top to the bottom, or will you inspire us by maximizing our involvement in your agendas? And you have started inspiring us, and I wish that you continue. So my advice is simple: inspire us. The world is already full of manipulators. Let us build and be inspired to build a better and more inclusive future for everyone. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Sia, for another call to action of how do we support social issues and social development, and how do we make all the evidence that is being produced to be available to, again, users, but to build civic spaces, to build democratic processes, to empower the disempowered. And I think what's coming across in the last day and even today is the importance of looking at evidence for advocacy and activism. So thanks for bringing your voice, and I'm also very excited because we have two young people calling us to action, and they are the leaders who are going to take forward a lot of what some of the elders are trying to contribute to. So it's good that there's that energy and there's that passion and inspiration. Thanks very much. I'm going to hand over to Laura.
I'll stay seated just because I really feel in my body shook. Transforming evidence synthesis means resisting exclusion. Wow. Thank you so much for this. May this guide us throughout this day. So I'm sitting because if I stand up, maybe I'll just fall apart here. So it's my great honor, happiness, joy to be joined on stage with this colleague that is amazing. She is a huge leader in Brazilian government for promoting the use of evidence. She's now the head of policy evaluation and evidence unit in our National School of Public Administration, guiding some of our most amazing civil servants towards the big questions they have every day. And Tamili will share with us a little bit of this experience. And I really hope that our hearts open to the national schools inside governments that do such an amazing job talking to the people who are day-to-day facing these pressing challenges and really, really need support. Tamili.
Thank you, Laura. Hello, everyone. Good morning. It's a pleasure and an honor to be here. My name is Tamili, as Laura said, and I am a federal civil servant in Brazil for almost 12 years now, working across different ministries and the Presidency of the Republic, mostly in policy formulation and advisory roles. And so why does my story matter for this short talk? Because I'm here to share a bit about the Evaluation and Evidence Unit I am currently leading, which is a user-centered initiative. And our users are the very people in government, policymakers, and the civil service staff. So the National School of Public Administration, ENAP, is the acronym in Portuguese, is a public institution of the federal government, of the Brazilian federal government. We are positioned institutionally at the center of the government. So it means we are not tied to any specific policy area. ENAP is a school of government responsible for professional training for the civil service and policymakers, but we are also much more than that. We are a policy-oriented research center, we are an innovation hub and a think tank. Serving the whole public administration ecosystem. Despite being in national, we have specific programs for local governments as well. So in a nutshell, and this is the part I want to focus on, ENAP is a knowledge broker organization operating inside the government. And the unit, let me talk about the unit. We are a small team, as always. But we work across several different streams. The main one is something we call Evidence Express, a demand-driven support unit that responds to a wide range of policy-relevant questions across virtually any topic. That's the experience I will focus on more deeply today. But our work doesn't stop there. We also do model dissemination, helping other ministries and units develop their own evidence support units. And we are active in capacity sharing as well. We design and offer short courses about evidence and evaluation. We run workshops on knowledge translation and knowledge brokering. We've been documenting our learnings and experiments through publications, covering our innovation process, what we call our toolbox, methodological insights, teaching material for the civil service training. And there is also a policy evaluation stream, which I won't talk today, but I'll be happy to chat more about it during the coffee break. So the Evidence Express support unit, let me tell you a bit more about that. It's a demand-driven, as I said, service for advisory and decision-making. We were created in 2020 to connect research with policy-making by facilitating knowledge translation. But how do we actually do that? That's the big question. We talk to them. We talk a lot to the policymakers responsible for the policy we are producing the evidence about. We talk a lot, we ask a lot of questions. So these conversations are essential because they help us understand the policy context. We explore the motivation behind the demand, the why, which is especially important because it's not always to be informed. Identifying also the people involved, the intended use of evidence, the target audience we are producing and translating knowledge. So this is really important because it enables us to understand the need for evidence and to translate policy problems into research questions. So we carry out a sort of a policy analysis to position and frame the role evidence will play and how it fits in their context. So this process leads to tailored research plans designed to respond to relevant real-world policy demands and capture the real need for evidence. So the policymakers and the civil servants, our users, the users of the service, they collaborate with us throughout the entire production. Since the research question definition, because most of the times we help them to frame the question, but they collaborate with us, for example, choosing variables of interest, establishing criteria, categories for analysis, databases, etc. We respond to research questions that relate to all the policy process, and that's very important. So design, formulation, implementation, audit, civil society engagement, meaning at any moment, basically, of the policy process. So getting into the everyday policy making is understanding its ongoing layered decision making. It's not one specific moment. So our work is grounded in three core pillars. Timeliness, that's where the express in the name of the unit come from. Co-production and engagement. We have been using the word co-production to describe our work about a year or so when we found out there was a fancy concept for what we were already doing. So here it is, we are proudly using the vocabulary of the community. And just to give you a quick overview of our experience, in the past 4 years, we've produced 117 evidence products across a wide range of policy topics. The most requested topic cluster has been inclusion, social protection, and human rights, followed by public administration. The other category is quite mixed and includes areas such as tax, incentives, energy, finance. As you can imagine, working across such diverse topics require different methodological approaches and strategies, and that's definitely a challenge we could talk more about later. And to tell you, we've worked with a variety of government bodies, just to name a few: Ministry of Economy, Planning, Treasury, Ministries of Human Rights, Racial Equality, Health, Culture, Education, and so on. And our productions, that's very important, go beyond synthesis and review methods because the questions the policymakers ask, they're very diverse. We also conduct data analysis, qualitative document analysis, policy briefs, among other mixed formats. To wrap up and share a few insights from our experience at a school of government, I would like to highlight the following. So first, co-production and collaboration significantly enhance policymakers' engagement with evidence. We all know that in theory, but I can tell you we have truly seen it in practice. Ongoing dialogue between researchers and policymakers is essential. It helps translate broad policy challenges into clear, actionable, and feasible. That's important, feasible, because sometimes they ask research questions that are not feasible. Which means very long policy therapy sections with them. Also building close relationships, that's a key word, relationships, with government structures matters when intermediating evidence. And up is credibility and legitimacy with policymakers And the civil service has been key to the success of our evidence support unit. The school is very old and solid institution, so the evidence unit is like a baby, very next to the other units that are older. So having an insider's perspective makes a difference, because ENAP is embedded in the daily work of government. Our unit is able to produce evidence that are closely aligned with the realities and priorities of the public sector. So connecting demand-side engagement, the practical experience of an evidence support unit and the expertise to develop capacity strengthening really shows the potential that schools of government have to strengthen the evidence infrastructure and support local ecosystems. When it comes to experimentation and innovation, schools of government often enjoy more independency and flexibility to try new approaches. And we have just done that. We've tested different methods, adjusted our processes, and learned a lot along the way. And finally, and perhaps most important, state capacity is crucial. When we have stronger government units know how to demand evidence and how to use evidence throughout the policy process. That's important to stress. Not just at the decision-making moment, but from the beginning to the end, including engagement with citizens, civil society, and local governments. I'm happy to have seen many of these elements reflected in the roadmap and discussions of the working groups yesterday. And I hope this presentation has offered you some useful insights, and I would be more than happy to keep the conversation going. Thank you, Laura and Lawrence, for the invitation. Thank you all for listening.
Colleagues, Global South capacity. I hope you are inspired. This was the aim of this beautiful session. I know I feel electric for the day to come. We now will transition to another session, so with heavy hearts say goodbye to these beautiful people that join us and invite our amazing Rona to lead the next session. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Laura and Chanel, and such great and inspirational presenters. Good morning again. So we'll transition a little bit. Not a big transition though, but something that we thought was important for us to sort of think about. So there are usually differences. Differences exist between national, regional, and maybe even global decision-making when you compare this to decisions that are made within subnational or lower-level jurisdictions. And this is because there's variations in scope. You're talking about global issues, and then compare that to somebody who's probably making decisions for a city, for a district. There's variations in scope, in scale, in context. I was first introduced to these big, decisions by a friend who's sitting in the room, Ian Goldman. So many years ago. I won't say how many years, just in case you find out how old I am. But, this begins then to bring about the idea of evidence for big decisions, or you hear other people refer to it, policy at scale, or, words to that effect. And so for those same reasons, that the decisions differ, the scale, the scope, the context, their needs for evidence will probably also differ. Such decisions may require broad, generalizable evidence, where subnational decisions might have benefited from localized, context-specific evidence. These bigger decisions may need a weave of what we've come to call, at ACRES, we've come to define this as sector-sensitive data, woven together, and not necessarily in equal proportions, but in appropriate ones, where you had, sector-specific data for supporting lower-level sorts of decisions. Now, these higher-level decisions also involve broader policy issues requiring evidence that can inform national strategies, laws, regulations, things to that effect. So the evidence needs to be relevant to entire nations or regions or even the world, considering diverse populations, geographic regions. This level may prioritize more of, economic analysis and large-scale studies and quantitative data that can be generalized across, big proportions. I think you get the idea that I'm trying to sort of weave here. Now, the level of complexity of decision-making in many ways determines the level of complexity of the support for the process. I know this for sure, having led a team that has experienced support to the different levels, in governance, all the way from, a district office through to the president's office, so we're still talking national level, onwards to a regional bloc like the East African Community and SADC, onwards to the UK Foreign Office, so now you're sitting somewhere in Africa, but then supporting a foreign office. And then recently with friends, at McMaster and others, supporting the UN Secretary General's Advisory Board. Those are very different, levels of support. What does it look like using evidence to support, big decisions? Policy scale synthesis is needed, and current approaches are great. All the approaches we've been talking about, they're really great, but they may need a few adjustments in many ways to be appropriate. And also, how does this kind of venture fit into ESIC's 5-step approach and roadmap? Do things differ by sector? And if so, how? So I will ask, some people who've had first-hand experience, and I know there's so many, within the room, but I'll ask a few people to come and give us their first-hand experience with this sort of decision-making space, to share their experiences, to talk about the practicalities, and to share their understanding with us. Some of you who have been part of these processes will probably recognize what they're talking about. I'll keep my presence really minimum in between their presentations so we can use the time very well. So I'll let you know right away who's coming over, and I'll ask them to keep going as I also sit and enjoy along with you. You'll not see me until they are done, unless they mess up really bad. So I'll ask Isabel Boutron, who's with Cochrane France, to join me here. I'll also ask Mohamed Zaman from the Education Endowment Foundation. And I'll ask Shivet Bakrania, is he here? Yes, from the UNDP. And in that same order, I'll ask them to share with us their experiences. I'll be a little biased and only permit Isabel to use some visual mode to demonstrate something that I specifically asked her to. I'll return after they have spoken. Let's listen in and see. Will you speak first? Okay. Shivit thinks maybe he has something to let us know before the others. Sorry, so Shivit will come in, and then Isabel, and then Mohammed. Shivit will say something again after that, but I'll come in at some point.
Thanks, Rona. So yeah, my name's Shiv. Can we have the slides, please? Fantastic. So my name's Shiv. I'm from UNDP Independent Evaluation Office, and I'm also part of the Secretariat for the Global SDG Synthesis Coalition. And I've been asked to give an overview on this idea of evidence for big decisions and what it means in the context of the ESIC roadmap. So Lawrence and some of the others from the ESIC Secretariat have been making fun of me over the past day or two, saying that this is going to be the sort of main geek out session of the meeting. So we'll see, but I'm okay with that. I've embraced my inner geek, and I hope you all have too. And before we go into the serious stuff, I'm just going to maybe diverge a little bit and start off with a little bit of geeky silliness. So next slide. Oh, I have the... There we go. So I'm claiming this as the unofficial motto of ESIC, okay? So over the past day or two, we've been having serious discussions, lots of deep dives into serious themes. We've been talking about AI-enabled synthesis, designing an infrastructure for evidence, game-changing governance for synthesis. So I hope you're keeping your heads above water, and if you aren't, remember, keep calm and synthesize on. I have one more. I'm taking a big risk here. I'm doing something silly. Okay, so this is a meme I came up with. It gives you an idea of the state of my mind over the past couple of days, which has been wandering over the various meetings that we've been having. But just let's take a moment to think about what this meme says. That moment when the synthesis actually answers a policy question that a decision maker is asking. So this big green tick, that's what we're all here for, right? And we end up with an ESIC win. Right, rhymes with epic, if you didn't get it. Okay. All right, on to the serious stuff. Okay, so why is evidence for big decisions so important, and how is it being presented in the context of the ESIC roadmap? So we know all of this stuff. Decision makers lack timely, user-ready evidence for major decisions, and the decisions they're making on high stakes challenges, things like climate, conflict, inequality, pandemics, which demand fast and trustworthy evidence. So ESIC envisions a step change, this idea of AI-enabled synthesis designed to serve real-world needs. And the roadmap positions evidence for big decisions as central to overcoming this kind of status quo, which is fragmented and maybe in some cases inefficient. So we're moving towards this new norm, this idea of timely, affordable, co-produced synthesis that is embedded into decision making. Okay, so in terms of the roadmap, we have these 5 steps, and step 2 is where this kind of vision of evidence for big decisions really comes alive. So I think what the roadmap for me is suggesting is this kind of movement from something that, conceptualization is a synthesis that is a static report to one which is more like a layer of intelligence that is constantly evolving, being updated, that is user-centered, that provides actionable insights, and that is easily plugged into decision-making tools and dashboards. And over the past 6 months, Rona mentioned some of these things, we've been using different terms for what essentially is the same aspiration, right? So the roadmap introduces this concept of evidence for big decisions. It also talks about policy scale synthesis. So some of us over the past few weeks have been trying to get to the bottom of what do we mean by a policy scale synthesis, at what level of scope does this imply? And another major reference point was the Global Evidence Report that came out in 2024, published by the UK Economic and Social Research Centre and Nesta. And one of the co-authors is here, David Halpern. So this introduces a concept of meta-living evidence synthesis. And it's kind of described as this high-quality, comprehensive, constantly updated synthesis, which in itself incorporates other reviews, which somehow kind of combine into a coherent policy-relevant whole, okay? I think all of these things are talking about the same kind of concept. The idea is that we move beyond the kind of individual intervention level to something that is policy scale. So business as usual falls short, and maybe that's a bit unfair because there's many examples and precedents for work that is at the policy level, as Rona mentioned, even within this room. But it's this idea of moving from static to something that is living, this idea of moving from syntheses that integrate across geographies, contexts, and interventions, and towards something that is dynamic, that is updated, that is interactive, that is actionable, and easily plugged into kind of interactive means for our interest holders to access the evidence. And yeah, Rona touched on this as well, but different sectors may have different approaches to this, and I don't want to foreground the discussion too much, but the idea here is that we'll see some of these approaches in different ways. So Isabel will talk about the COVID NMA approach, which is this big unified living evidence synthesis, which provides a view of COVID-19 treatments and vaccine effectiveness. Mohamed's going to talk about the teaching and learning toolkit, which a lot of us are familiar with, kind of linked to user-facing toolkit. And I'll try and talk a little bit about the aspirations of the Global SDG Synthesis Coalition, where we're trying to think about a modular approach to covering synthesis on the SDGs. So with that, I'll hand over to Isabel.
How do you move the slides? Good morning, everyone. I'm delighted to be here today and to have the opportunity to highlight the COVID NMA initiative. I'm professor of epidemiology at Université Paris-Cité and also director of Cochrane France. So the story of the COVID NMA initiative started long before COVID, with several methodological and several conceptual work and research that were summarized in 3 articles that were published in the Journal of Clinical Epidemiology in 2020 under the leadership of Philippe Raveau. And these 3 articles highlighted the limitation of the current evidence synthesis ecosystem and called for a new research ecosystem where we would bridge the gap between trialist, evidence synthesis, guidelines developer, and policymaker. And that this new system will rely on network meta-analysis where all treatment and intervention for a given conditions will be synthesized in a single evidence synthesis. So when the COVID-19 pandemic arose, it was obvious for us that we needed to provide evidence synthesis to decision makers because they will have to make very important and big decisions, and that we could use our thinking and do a proof of concept. And that's how the COVID NMA initiative was created. It relied on 3 main pillars: a living mapping, a living systematic review, and a living monitoring feedback to try to improve primary research. Our scope was very large. We consider all treatment and vaccine for COVID-19. Our goal was first to be quick, speed, because people needed up-to-date evidence, and the amount of evidence that was produced was huge, but also to be rigorous and to have high quality. So we needed to have a very rigorous process and very efficient workflow. So we developed a living protocol that was submitted and reviewed by the Cochrane collaboration, and that was evolved over time according to stakeholder needs. We set up a very strong process to search, study, extract data in duplicate, assess the risk of bias in duplicate, analyze the data on a weekly basis and produce a forest plot, and grade the evidence with the production of summary of finding tables, and communicate all these results. Our process, of course, evolved over time to try to reduce the workload, and we work, for example, with Epistemonicals, who developed the LOVE platform, and with Cochrane, who developed the COVID-19 study registered that allowed reducing considerably the workload for screening studies, and that relied on crowdsourcing and AI tools. For the communication of results, it appears quite clearly that the mean of communication couldn't be publication, peer-review publication, because the process was too long. Writing the manuscript, submitting the peer review process, the review published would be immediately outdated. So we decided to develop an open access platform, the COVID NMA platform, where people could access all the information that were updated every week. Everybody knew that it was on the Friday that we updated the platform. And people could get access to the study characteristic, risk of bias assessment with justification for all outcomes, all the forest plots that were updated every week, and the grading of the evidence with summary of finding tables. So you can see on this slide an example of the forest plots that were available. And again, we tried to automate some of the aspects. So the production of forest plots, we developed some tools to automate and accelerate the production of this forest plot. We also thought that for the user, it was important that they could use our data and make their own analysis, because we made some decision on the type of analysis we were doing, on the study that we were including, and people might want to explore the data, do subgroup analysis, do sensitivity analysis. So we developed MetaCovid, where people could use our data, and so the MetaCovid was updated weekly, and they could choose a treatment comparison, choose an outcome, and decide of their own analysis. For example, they could decide they didn't want to include preprint. And this would automatically produce a forest plot, a tailored forest plot, according to the user's need that they can download. Another important pillar of this platform was a living mapping, because you need to know what is the upcoming evidence, what is the ongoing work that is producing in evidence. So we rely on clinical trial registry. We downloaded data from the WHO platform, but also from primary registry. We developed a data warehouse. And from these data were extracted related to the intervention and the participants. And then we gave access to the data to the user using interactive data visualization. So for example, here, there's a big map and there's lots of information and people can filter the information. They can just click on the country and can see all the studies that were performed in their country. Click on a specific treatment and have access of all the studies that are evaluating this treatment. And of course, they can download all the data. So overall, for the COVID NMA initiative, we identified, extracted, assessed for risk of bias, and analyzed more than 300 studies. We also extracted more than 4,600 registered trials. Of course, the protocol and the platform evolved over time. At the beginning of the pandemic, there was no randomized controlled trials, so we included observational study. Then the number of randomized controlled trials increased considerably, so we focused on randomized evidence. Then for some questions, particularly the effectiveness of vaccine on variant of SARS-CoV-2, we had to go back to observational study, and we summarize and synthesize the evidence of observational data. The scope also moved over time because we had so much evidence coming up. We had to make some decision, and so we decided to stop extracting data for some types of treatment that did not seem promising, but we were still tagging the study, so people could still go on the platform, have the list of studies that were actually evaluating this treatment and extract the data. Or we could easily, if the stakeholder needed, go back to this study and extract the data and improve the data extraction. There was a very wide use of data. Of course, we don't really know because people just went on the platform, downloaded the forest plot, downloaded the information, and we don't always know who actually used it. But it was widely used by the WHO for their guidelines and for their communication, by several guidelines developers, by several Ministry of Health that actually used the data and could come every Friday on the platform to see what was the new information available. And just as an example, because we had a very strong collaboration with South Africa, and particularly with Tamara, so a lot of the communication and the document that were used and the guidelines that were used actually the COVID NMA data to develop guidelines and reports in South Africa. Thank you very much for your attention, and I leave it on to you.
Good morning, everyone. I see an interesting difference between the panel this morning and this more geeky panel. The more activist-focused panel, everyone greeted you in 5 different languages. And then they waited for you to reply back. While the geeks are slightly more formal, slightly more reserved, we say good morning in one language and then we move on, which suits me just perfectly fine. So I'm Mohammed Zaman from the Education Endowment Foundation, the EEF. We are a research organization based in England, and our work is primarily to provide evidence regarding some of those big questions around what are the best ways of raising educational outcomes for school children, especially those for from the most disadvantaged backgrounds. And one of the ways that we do this is by synthesizing studies and producing accessible plain language summaries. And it is this synthesis work that I'll very briefly be talking about right now, and in particular our Teaching and Learning Toolkit, which is one of our main synthesis products at the EEF. So the toolkit is an evidence portal which contains plain language summaries of evidence around different types of interventions in education. So it includes 30 different thematic areas, or toolkit strands as we refer to them. So one strand might be about the impact of giving homework to school children and whether that raises attainment. Another one might be about class sizes, and if reducing class sizes, having fewer children in classes, whether that raises attainment levels. Another one might be about behavioral interventions and whether those have any impact on raising attainment for school children. So each of those 30 strands is based on a systematic review and a meta-analysis. So that's 30 systematic reviews in total across the toolkit. And with the updates that we've been doing this year, those reviews are now being turned into living reviews, with all 30 strands being living reviews by the end of this year. And for each of these thematic areas, each of these strands, we provide a plain language summary of the evidence, along with the average costs of the interventions in that area, the strength of the evidence base, and most importantly, the impact of interventions for that thematic area. And if we look at the evidence base behind the toolkit, then there's a database of around 5,500 studies with the data extracted on around 80 to 100 different variables. So that's a bit about the toolkit. Now, who actually uses the toolkit? And our primary audience for the toolkit, and in fact for most of the work that we do at the EEF, that primary audience is one of school leaders and classroom teachers. And especially when it comes to the toolkit, we know that it is hugely popular in England, where according to independent surveys and from figures from our education ministry, it's used by around 70% of school leaders when they're making decisions about new interventions to implement in their schools. Now, what's the reason? Why is it so popular? And I think that one of the main reasons why the toolkit is so popular with school leaders, apart from the fact that it does not sit behind a paywall, is the fact that it uses that plain language, that accessible language that school leaders and teachers can understand. So this is going to be very different from what Isabel sort of showed, because we don't use forest plots, because we're talking to school leaders. We don't use any, what I would call academic jargon. So we don't even use terms like effect sizes. Instead, we use terms and ideas that are accessible and understandable to school leaders and to classroom teachers. So I'll just give you one example. As I said, that we won't use that term effect size. We don't even show any effect sizes in our toolkit. The only place where we show that are the technical appendices, which are sort of slightly hidden, accessible but slightly hidden because they're more for researchers rather than our primary audience. Because frankly, if you said to a school teacher that, I don't know, let's say the average impact of interventions where teachers are providing feedback to students, the impact is an effect size of, let's say, 0.31. Now, what does that mean to a school leader? It doesn't mean anything to them. So then how do we convey that impact? And we do this by converting those effect sizes into additional months of progress that students might make on average if they're receiving that intervention. So showing that impact in months of progress, now that is something that teachers and school leaders can more easily understand than effect sizes, which don't really mean anything to them. And this is a principle that we follow throughout the toolkit, where we remove any terms that teachers might not understand. So we do a lot of stakeholder engagement to understand where the sector is. And then we meet the sector over there rather than thinking that the sector needs to meet us in our research world. So we meet them where they are. And what this means is that teachers and school leaders can then easily compare interventions by impact. They can compare them by costs. They can compare them by the strength of evidence behind those intervention areas, and then make informed decisions based on all of those taken together. And while school leaders are our main primary audience, policymakers are also an important stakeholder for us. And having this access to synthesis-ready data that sits behind the toolkit means that we're able to respond very quickly at times when we have urgent policy questions that come up. So I'll give you one example. During COVID, when education of so many children was affected, we were asked by our education ministry, what are the best ways to help those children to make up for that lost learning? So we were able to very quickly look at the data that we had, and we recommended tutoring as one of the best ways to do this, to fill that gap. And based on that recommendation, our education ministry and the government set up a £1.4 billion national tutoring program that is still ongoing. And while I've been talking about the toolkit and the database of studies behind it, from the perspective of its use in England, it's also important to note that we share that underlying data with our international partners. We have around a dozen international partners, and they all have toolkits which are locally contextualized and relevant to their countries and education systems. And I'm very happy to talk about that contextualization and transferability of the toolkit to anyone who's interested in that. And then very lastly, one thing that got me really excited even before we got here to Cape Town was the announcement by the Jacobs Foundation to fund for the education sector the piloting of a shared repository, a shared evidence repository, and a shared common taxonomy in education. This is something that we at the EEF have been advocating for years. I've been at the EEF for 7 years, and since I joined, I know that this is something we've been interested in. So it is really exciting to see Jacobs take that initiative, and we hope that we'll be able to work with Jacobs and others in this space to make this a success. And it's really exciting to see education having that big moment when it comes to evidence synthesis. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm going to sit down if that's okay, because I feel like I've done my stand-up bit. But I'm going to talk a bit about the approach that the Global SDG Coalition is taking, and maybe this is a bit more aspirational, but I'll start at the beginning of the coalition about 3 years ago, when it was a bit of a megalomaniac idea. For anyone who knows the coalition, you'll understand that it's structured around these 5 SDG pillars. So the 17 SDGs are grouped into these 5 pillars, which is the peace pillar, which is 1 SDG, SDG 16, the partnership pillar, which is again 1 SDG, which is SDG 17, and then the people, prosperity, and planet pillars, which have 5 SDGs each in those pillars, okay? So the initial idea was to do one kind of magnum opus synthesis on each of these pillars, right? Which may seem like a crazy idea, but that was the initial ambition. And if you think about it, how would you even go about doing a synthesis of the whole people pillar, for example, which includes SDGs 1 to 5 and includes things like the SDGs related to education and health and gender equality. So effectively what you're trying to do is sort of synthesize the whole of, I don't know, social science evidence, and it's impossible. So, I mean, the first synthesis we did was on the partnership pillar, SDG 17. So we were trying to cover the whole SDG. And we learned a lot through that experience. It was just too big of a scope. And maybe we could have done the synthesis better and differently, but we ended up with something that wasn't necessarily actionable, and the findings and insights were too generic. So after that, we decided that perhaps under each pillar and under each SDG, we need to identify those priorities or those accelerator areas that are seen as being important for accelerating progress against that SDG. So the next one we did, and hopefully this will be out soon, is on the peace pillar. We went through a scoping exercise. We looked at the evidence across the SDG, both in terms of research evidence, but also evaluative evidence, so the evaluations that are published by UN entities, which we could call process and performance evaluations. We looked at key UN frameworks, so we looked at what was being discussed in these high-level political forums within the UN, and what was being said by important UN strategy documents. And we looked at the different interests of the different UN evaluation entities that made up the Peace Pillar Management Group. Each of them had their own mandates and interests, so there was a kind of political aspect there as well in terms of choosing what we go ahead on. So we ended up in a state under the Peace Pillar where we kind of divided it up into 4 buckets. One bucket is around conflict prevention and peace building. The other one is around equitable and just societies. The third one is around legal identity, and the fourth one is around gender-based violence. And that last one crosswalks between SDG 16 and SDG 5, so it crosswalks between the peace and the people pillars, okay? So those are 4 buckets going forward, and the idea is that we take a modular approach, so each of these would be, they're each big policy areas in their own right, but it's a modular approach to kind of determining, if these syntheses are aligned and they speak to each other, then we can say through these 4 syntheses what it means to kind of accelerate progress against SDG 16. So that's the aspirational approach, and I think there's similarities with what maybe Mohammed presented. It'd be great if we could have a kind of a toolkit for the SDGs that covers all of the SDGs, and it speaks in a way to interest holders in the way that the teaching and learning toolkit does. I don't know if that's feasible or practical, but I think that's the kind of thing I would hope for under this ESIC process. But the key message is that for the SDGs, I think it has to be a modular approach for it to work.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Shiv. Thank you, Isabel. Thank you, Mohammed. Very interesting examples there, and very diverse. But at least there's definitely a string of, things that come through that if I needed, and I know that a few of us might already be thinking, if I want to be, or if I want to make that step change, to support decision-making at a higher level or in different sectors or in decisions that, go across sectors, I have 2 questions, and unfortunately, we can't do any more than that because we are running out of time. But what is that step change or, the step forward to go to a level where, what are the kinds of things I would need to change to be able to do the kind of things you're talking about? And maybe the other thing also, how do you make things transferable between contexts? If you're working with different contexts, some of us are we're very good with the particular sectors, we're very good with working with a particular context, maybe some of us are really good with the global south, and then now, what are those things that would help me make things transferable? And I'm happy for you to pick this up anyhow.
Thank you for those questions. I can make a very quick start on the second question around contextualization, transferability. So very quickly, So I mentioned that, the toolkit came out in a particular context in England, but now it's being used globally. And we have about a dozen partners, one of them eBase Africa in the room over here. So how do you take a toolkit that was produced in England, and then how do you contextualize it for, let's say, the Cameroonian context? And there are some decisions that we made at the very beginning which have sort of come to bite us now in the backside. One of them was around what sort of studies are we including? So we were only including impact studies in education. And we know that where are those impact studies going to come from? They're going to come from a very particular context. So when it comes to, if we're using that terms, global north, global south, then the majority of the studies that we have come from the global north. So then how do you contextualize it for the global south context? And the way we do it, the model we have, it's not perfect, but it's the first step of doing it, right? So the first step that we have taken is you take that impact data that you have, which is coming from, most of it is coming from global north, and you say, okay, this is telling me the direction of travel. This is telling me whether interventions in this area are effective or not. What I now want to do is, I want to look at implementation in Cameroon or in Chile, for example, right? So our partners will do qualitative research in their particular areas to supplement the impact data that we have. So they will be looking at, okay, if we were to implement this in Cameroon, what are the implementation barriers? What are the facilitators? They might even do stakeholder engagement. They will do focus groups to see what's the perception of policymakers, what's the perception of teachers and school leaders. How do you overcome any barriers that they foresee? So it's all about having different sort of data to answer different questions. So you have that impact data to show you what's the sort of direction of travel, and then you supplement it with other data to just sort of, okay, this is how I can implement it more successfully in my context. So that's the way that we've been doing it.
Very helpful, and I think I had something, when Isabel was saying we were sensitive to the fact that someone might need this, but maybe not this. Tell us more about that.
Yeah, I think, if you have one place where people can access the data, and if you provide people tools to do their own analysis, they can then use these data to contextualize. As soon as they have the data, they can do locally the work because they're the best to know how it could work locally. And I think these data should also be useful to decide what is the needed evidence. So what is the primary research we should do from the evidence synthesis? And this could also be a local decision. In our setting, we don't have any evidence and the existing evidence is not useful, so we need to do our own evidence. And I think having a place where you can access in an easy way to manipulate the data and to use the data is the right way to go.
Thanks, Isabel. Shiv, I'll ask you to give us the last word. Tomorrow, what can I change? What can I begin to think about? What can ESIC members begin to think about moving from our small domains and thinking about supporting, policy level, policy scale, several words that we shall probably, again, look at as a community. What are those step changes we would be beginning to think about?
Okay, no, that's not a small question, right? So the answer is implementing the ESIC roadmap. No, is that too one message? Okay. No, one of the first things we can do is, I think, talk to each other and make sure. I think a simple, maybe quick win is that, we all have our own repositories and databases and things like that. And I think a really great thing would be to make sure that they talk to each other. So, we're looking across themes and making sure our taxonomies and kind of labels and tags talk to each other. And that could be a great first step because that ultimately means that we have some sort of standardization in the way that we're storing evidence, and then it can be used easier.
Perfect. Thank you so much. I'm sure this is a conversation that we could have for a whole week, just thinking about, how we can support those sorts of levels of policy and decision making. And I hope that we've stimulated, a few thoughts, and we can go back and continue with those. I'll thank the panel so much. Let's give them a round of applause. And I'll let them go. But before you go off to tea, I have more stimulation. I'm about stimulation today. I just want to show you a little bit of what's coming up. So we're working towards something. Does anybody remember what we're working towards? Oh, gosh. Okay, they gave you the answer. Okay. The charter. So there's a few people in the background picking up the conversation and beginning to put this in that one-pager that we talked about. And I'm giving you a little bit of a snapshot of what's, coming out. It's all your conversation. The 5 steps are in there, beginning to come together. From conversations yesterday, you'll see the highlights in blue, and you'll recognize, some of those things that are coming out, some of the principles that are beginning to get reflected, the sense of progress and significant alignment that has happened over the last 6 months. You're beginning to see what the benefit would be from regular, ongoing communication. This is in the step of trying to build a better, evidence synthesis infrastructure. You're beginning to see what's coming out of the, a user-centered evidence synthesis. You can recognize some of the conversations, okay? But you will also begin to see that the language is about what we've agreed, or, and this should speak to us, but also speak to somebody who wasn't here, also speak to my daughter 50 years from now. This is what we said in Cape Town, okay? Take a look. We'll be reviewing this, at regular intervals before the end. Give me the next page, please. Okay. You see what's coming out in the number 3, what we're talking about in terms of working with intermediaries. This is ongoing work, so it's not complete. And if you have any, thoughts about it, anything you feel strongly about, don't forget, you can use the whiteboards. You can also use, you can scan, the QR codes on the tables. Continue to give input. I'm really hopeful that by tomorrow, we will have something solid. Maybe it will need a little more tweaking, but we'll have really the major framework, okay? You can see that. So I just wanted to give you a bit of a flavor before we go off to tea. Again, to encourage you to continue to think about this, and remember that that is what we're working towards. Hopefully tomorrow we'll have something. But again, to remind you that speak up, because all of this is coming from your conversation. So when you go back to your groups today again, keep speaking. Let's get something. So thank you so much. I think we'll go off to tea now. I don't know if there's any logistical issues, nothing much. So everything is running as planned as before. But I will remind you about the photo, okay? I hope you're not all feeling frozen and you'll be able to smile, okay? So tea, picture, and let's jump into the rest of the day. Thank you so much.